Lesson 4. In this presentation, we'll be looking at the plural endings of nouns like the one we have looked at, case with verbs of perception, and we'll be introduced to the instrumental dative. As far as verbs go, we will look at the plural endings there too. We will talk about mood and then the imperative in Greek, and then we will look finally at negation. These are the singular endings for the phrase hasapas lagos, the wise speech. We have here all the forms of the definite article in the singular, all the forms of the adjective sapas, and all the forms of the noun lagos. These, of course, are all masculine forms. It's the only gender we've really been introduced to so far at this point. We are going to look at the plural endings of this phrase. We are going to be introduced all at the same time to the forms of the definite article in the plural, the forms of the adjective in the plural, and the forms of the noun in the plural. Fortunately, we will see that they're actually all the same, just as they're very, very similar in the singular. So we start with our tau in the genitive, dative, and accusative in the plural for the definite article, just like we had above there in the singular. And then we're going to take our adjective stem and our noun stem. That leaves us with something to start with. Then we're going to look at these endings, which we will not have been introduced to before. In the plural nominative, we're going to see hoi or oi. Hoi sapoi lagoi would be the wise speeches. They're in the nominative. And then this on, ton sapon lagon, would be the wise speeches in the genitive. The dative, we're going to see tois sapois lagois, the wise speeches in the dative. And you'll notice here that in the dative singular as well as in the dative plural, we have some form of iota, whether the iota subscript in the singular there, or just the normal adscript form in the plural. And finally, in the accusative, the plural accusative, we get tous sapus lagus. Again, the wise speeches in the accusative. So these are all the forms. We are going to accentuate them properly, and we now have here the full paradigm of hasapas lagos, the wise speech. In English, we use different verbs to capture the difference between the source of a perception and that perception itself. For example, I listen to the person. Here, the person is the source of a perception. Presumably the person is speaking, is saying something. That's what I'm hearing, actually. I'm listening to the person. The focus is on the source of the perception and not the actual content. Whereas I hear the person, that person is actually the content. We are perhaps hearing the person move in the dark or something like that. I hear the person coming. I hear the person speaking. The focus is on the person as perception. This is a distinction we capture again in English by using different verbs, to listen and then to hear. In Greek, the same verb is sometimes used with different cases to capture this difference, which again we capture by using different verbs. For instance, we're going to take the verb akouo, I listen, I hear, and we are going to see it, first of all, with the genitive, tu anthropou akouo. And this means I listen to the person. Here, the person is the source of the perception. The person is speaking, is giving a speech, and we are listening to that person give the speech or speak. Whereas, in the accusative, if we say tan anthropon akouo, it is the actual person that we are hearing. Once again, that person is the perception, just as that person is in English when we say, I hear the person. So here, the genitive maps onto our verb listen, and the accusative maps onto hear. This is a distinction that actually holds true for lots of different verbs of perception in Greek, but we're going to see it in the readings with akouo. In addition to indicating an indirect object, the dative case can be used to show the instrument by means of or with which something is done. An example of this instrumental dative, for this we need to learn a new verb, didaskal, I teach. And the example sentence is Hasokrates lagos didaske. Here we have Hasokrates in the singular nominative, means Socrates. Again, we sometimes see that definite article where we wouldn't expect it. And then lagos is here in the dative case. It's dative plural. We just learned this ending. And then we have the verb didaske. It's form of didaska, I teach. It's third person singular. It agrees with our nominative subject. So it is Socrates doing the teaching. And by means of what, or with what, is he doing the teaching? Socrates teaches with words, logos, dative case, instrumental dative. These are the singular endings of a verb like pao, I stop, in the present indicative. We're familiar with these. Pao, I stop. Pao ace, you stop, or are stopping. Pao a, he, she, or it stops. We are going to be introduced, of course, to the plural forms of the present indicative active here. And we're going to start, of course, with our verb stem, which is the same as in the singular. And here, too, as with the definite article and adjective and noun, we're going to learn some new endings. We will not have seen these before. So, pao amen, pao ete, pao usin. These are the forms for the first, second, and third persons, plural, of this verb. So it's pao amen, we stop, pao ete, y'all stop, pao usin, they stop. Now you'll probably notice something there in the parentheses, in the third person plural. There's a nu there. This is called the movable nu. And this is something we will sometimes see and sometimes not see, depending on what comes after it. If it's followed immediately by a word, and that word begins with a consonant, like tau in this case, we're not going to see it. Whereas, if the next word begins with a vowel or a diphthong, smooth or rough breathing, doesn't matter which, we are going to see that movable nu there. At the end of a sentence, you may see it, you might not. That's left to the discretion of the writer, typically. But this is the rule for whether or not you add the movable nu in the third person plural when the word is immediately followed by another one. We're going to see this movable nu elsewhere as well, so it's helpful to understand what's going on. So we've accentuated these properly. Pao, amen, pao, ete, pao, usin. These are accentuated according to the rules of recessive accents for verbs. And again, we stop, or are stopping, or do stop. Y'all stop, are stopping, do stop. They stop, are stopping, do stop. These are the plural endings, as well as the singular, for pao, I stop, in the present indicative active. Mood. As we have seen, verbs in English and Greek can be described according to qualities such as person and number. Verbs can also be described according to mood. The mood of a verb sometimes indicates the speaker's relation to the action described. For instance, the indicative refers to what is or is not the case, matters of fact primarily. For instance, the philosopher speaks, or the philosopher isn't speaking or doesn't speak. This is what is going on or isn't going on or was going on or wasn't going on, etc. Matters of fact. Whereas the imperative is used for orders, advice, etc., things like that. Speak, philosopher. In English, we often have an exclamation point at the end of a sentence in the imperative mood. And we'll see how this works in Greek in just a moment. Now, this is the conjugation of the English verb speak in the present indicative active. I speak, you speak, he speaks. We know how simple this conjugation is. Now, there in English is only an imperative, a different imperative form, really an imperative form in the second person. We only issue commands to people when we're directly speaking to them. Other kinds of constructions are not actually imperatives. So if we want to tell one person to speak, we say, speak. If you want to tell two people to speak, we also say speak. There's There's actually no difference in form. And we lose the pronoun there. In English, we do not, typically, in modern English anyway, use the pronoun there with the imperative. However, in pre-modern English and Shakespeare, for instance, you'll often see the pronoun still used with the imperative. But modern English, we capitalize that verb and we put an exclamation point often at the end of the sentence there. So this is the present imperative active in English. Let's look at the conjugation of lega, I speak, present indicative active. Here we have the singular and the plural endings that we just learned. And in Greek, this is one of the differences between Greek and English, we actually have imperative forms in both second and third persons. However, we're not going to worry about third person imperatives for a little while. They're not nearly as important. So we're just going to focus on second person imperatives, singular and plural. And actually, we only have one new form to learn, because it's only in the singular that the indicative and imperative are different. Instead of leges, in the imperative, we get leg-e, leg-e. That's the change. In the plural, it's actually the same as the indicative. So these are the forms of the imperative in Greek, of a verb like lega, I speak, in the present active. So again, the singular form is basically, in English, we would just translate this as speak. In the plural, again, speak. Finally, negations. In English, we use the same word to negate sentences in the indicative and the imperative moods. The philosopher is not speaking. This, again, is a sentence in the indicative mood, talking about matters of fact. But we use that same word, not, in the imperative too. Do not speak, philosopher. This seems natural to us. Why would we use a different word? In Greek, though, which word one uses depends partly on the mood of the verb one is negating. With the indicative, one uses u, uk, or uk. So we've seen this before, because all we've seen so far are verbs in the indicative, I believe. We see u before consonants, u legusin, for instance. That u is that negating word is followed by a word that begins with a consonant. We see uk before vowels, uk akue. It's again, we add the kappa because the next word is followed by a vowel. And then we add uk before rough breathing, uk holagoi. So vowels that have rough breathing, diphthongs that have rough breathing, are actually preceded by uk, which actually helps in pronunciation. These are obviously minor details, but you want to know, first of all, that u, uk, and uk all mean the same thing. And also you want to have some basic idea of why you're seeing these changes. If we are under the impression that all of these things are totally arbitrary, that's going to make the language quite a bit more difficult for us. It's also going to be a little discouraging, I think. There are actually reasons for all the changes we see. Here, they're primarily for purposes of pronunciation. You can try these out yourself, and how much more difficult it would be to say uk legusin than u legusin, or u akue than uk akue. It actually helps break up the words and makes it easier to understand and pronounce. With the imperative, however, we don't use any of those three. Instead, we use me. Me lege o philosope. So this is how you would say, do not speak, philosopher. We would not use u, uk, or uk. We would use me in the imperative. So again, means the same thing. We would translate this in the same way into English. But in Greek, we're going to see different words, and it can be really helpful to know why. For the forms of the nouns and the verbs that we have looked at today, you can look at page 24, page 26, and page 62, the masculine definite article, second declension masculine nouns, and the present tense of verbs in omega, the plural endings. And that is it. Thank you very much.